In the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, nestled between quiet suburban streets and bustling city corners, stood Grace Community Church. A modest yet elegant building with gleaming stained glass windows and a steeple that reached toward the heavens, it was more than just a house of worship. It was a sanctuary, a place of hope for its congregation. At the center of it all was Reverend Elijah Jacobs. At 42 years old, Elijah embodied everything the community respected. With his deep, resonant voice and a demeanor that exuded both authority and warmth, he had built a reputation as a man of God, a family man, and a leader. His sermons often brought tears to the eyes of his congregation, weaving personal struggles into biblical lessons of faith and redemption. His wife, Sarah Jacobs, was equally admired. Graceful and poised, Sarah was the glue that held both their family and the church together. She managed the church's women's ministry while juggling her roles as a wife and mother to their 2 children, Noah, 16, a quiet and thoughtful boy with a passion for art, and Grace, 10, a bubbly girl with a love for singing in the children's choir. Their life seemed perfect from the outside, but beneath the surface, Elijah carried a burden of secrets. Over the years, the demands of the ministry had created a chasm between him and Sarah. What had once been a passionate partnership had dulled into a routine of polite exchanges and unspoken resentment. Sarah, ever the supportive wife, assumed his distance was a product of stress, but Elijah's reasons were far more complicated. It was during one of those long, lonely nights at the church office that Elijah's life began to veer off course. Delilah Carter walked into Elijah's life like a summer storm, unexpected and impossible to ignore. At 28, she was sharp, beautiful, and driven, with piercing green eyes that seemed to see right through him. She had been hired 2 years earlier as Elijah's personal assistant, a role that required her to manage his packed schedule, coordinate with church staff, and handle the countless tasks that kept Grace Community Church running smoothly. To Elijah, Delilah was a godsend. She was efficient, resourceful, and always one step ahead. But it wasn't just her work ethic that drew him in. There was something magnetic about her, an energy that reminded him of the excitement he had once felt in his youth, before the weight of responsibility had settled on his shoulders. Their relationship began innocently enough. Late nights working in the church office often turned into casual conversations. Elijah found himself opening up to Delilah in ways he hadn't with anyone else. He shared stories about his struggles as a pastor, his insecurities, and even his frustrations with Sarah. Delilah listened intently, offering words of encouragement and understanding. For Delilah, these moments were intoxicating. She had always admired Elijah from afar, but now, sitting across from him as he poured out his heart, she felt a connection that she had never experienced before. Slowly but surely, their professional relationship crossed into dangerous territory. It started with small, seemingly innocent gestures, a lingering glance, a hand that rested on her shoulder a second too long. Then, one late night, as they sat side by side reviewing sermon notes, Elijah leaned in and kissed her. The moment was electric, a release of tension that had been building for months. From that night on, their affair became a secret they both guarded fiercely. To the outside world, Elijah remained the perfect husband and father, while Delilah continued to serve as his loyal assistant. But behind closed doors, they shared stolen moments of passion and whispered promises of a future together. For Delilah, the affair was more than just physical. She believed Elijah when he told her she was special, that she was different from the others. She dreamed of a life where they could be together openly, where she wouldn't have to hide her feelings. But Elijah had no intention of leaving his family. For him, Delilah was an escape, a way to fill the void he felt in his marriage without disrupting the life he had built. The cracks in their relationship began to show when Delilah stumbled upon a truth that shattered her illusions. It was a warm Friday evening when Delilah discovered the messages. Elijah had left his phone on his desk during a meeting, and when it buzzed, her curiosity got the better of her. She glanced at the screen, expecting a message from Sarah or a church staff member. Instead, she saw a text from someone named Tina. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. Delilah's heart sank. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the phone and scrolled through the conversation. What she found was devastating. Messages filled with flirtation, longing, and promises. Words Elijah had spoken to her, now directed at another woman. She kept scrolling, her stomach churning as she uncovered more messages to other women. Elijah's betrayals weren't limited to her or Tina. He had been lying to all of them. Her chest heaved as anger and humiliation overwhelmed her. She had believed him when he said she was different. She had trusted him, given herself to him, only to discover she was just one in a line of women he had used. The betrayal consumed her, leaving her raw and vengeful. She couldn't let him get away with it. Delilah confided in Rochelle, an old friend she had met years ago at an HIV support group. Rochelle, a tough and no-nonsense woman in her 30s, had always been outspoken about the injustices she had faced. When Delilah told her about Elijah's betrayal, Rochelle's reaction was immediate. "That man is a hypocrite," Rochelle said, her voice seething with anger. "He stands up there every Sunday, preaching about sin and morality, while he's out here breaking every commandment in the book. You can't let him walk away from this." "I don't know what to do," Delilah admitted, her voice shaking. "I feel so stupid." "I believed him." Rochelle leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You have the power to make him pay. He doesn't get to ruin your life and walk away like nothing happened." "What do you mean?" Delilah asked cautiously. Rochelle pulled out a small vial filled with blood. "This is mine," she said bluntly. "You know my status. If you really want to make him suffer, this is how." Delilah stared at the vial, her mind racing. The idea was horrifying, but the thought of Elijah continuing his double life, using and discarding women, made her blood boil. Delilah wrestled with her decision for days. Every time she looked at the vial Rochelle had given her, a storm of emotions raged inside her: anger, betrayal, guilt, and a flicker of doubt. Part of her knew this wasn't the answer, but the humiliation Elijah had subjected her to was too much to bear. Every time she thought of his lies, the way he had made her feel special while sharing the same sweet words with other women, her resolve hardened. She waited for the perfect opportunity, watching Elijah's schedule closely. One late night, as they worked together in the church office, Elijah mentioned how tired he'd been feeling lately. It was the opening she needed. "You know," she said casually, "I've been reading about these vitamin shots. They're supposed to give you a quick boost of energy. I have a couple at home. I could bring one for you." Elijah smiled, oblivious to her intentions. "That would be great. Thanks, Delilah." The following evening, she arrived at the church with the vial hidden in her bag. Her heart pounded as she prepared the syringe, her hands trembling slightly. Elijah sat at his desk, reviewing notes for Sunday's sermon, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. "Here we go," Delilah said, forcing a smile as she approached him. She swabbed his arm, injected the syringe, and stepped back, her face carefully neutral. Elijah winced but said nothing, thanking her as she cleaned up the supplies. As she left the office that night, her emotions were a whirlwind. Satisfaction, guilt, and fear tangled together in a knot that tightened in her chest. She had done it. There was no turning back now. Elijah didn't notice the effects right away. Weeks passed before the first symptoms appeared: mild fatigue, occasional headaches, and night sweats. At first, he attributed it to overwork. Grace Community Church was growing rapidly, and the demands on his time were greater than ever. Sarah, however, was worried. She noticed how often he seemed drained and how he brushed off her concerns. "Elijah, you need to slow down," she urged one evening as they sat together in their living room. "You can't pour from an empty cup." "I'm fine, Sarah," he replied, his tone clipped. "It's just a busy season." But Sarah wasn't convinced. A month later, she began experiencing symptoms of her own: persistent fatigue, unexplained weight loss, and a constant sense of unease. She tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to stress. But when the symptoms worsened, she insisted they both see a doctor. The diagnosis came during a routine checkup: As the doctor explained the results, the words HIV positive seemed to echo in the room. Sarah's face went pale, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Elijah sat frozen, his mind racing. He couldn't deny the truth any longer. This wasn't a random occurrence. Someone had done this to him. How is this possible? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. We've been faithful, haven't we? Elijah couldn't meet her eyes. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him like a stone, but he couldn't bring himself to confess, not yet. In the weeks that followed, Elijah's health continued to decline. His congregation noticed his pallor and fatigue, whispering among themselves about their beloved pastor's sudden change in appearance. Sarah, too, grew weaker, her once vibrant presence now overshadowed by exhaustion and despair. Elijah couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that someone had targeted him. His thoughts kept returning to Delilah and the vitamin shot she had given him weeks earlier. Her recent behavior only fueled his suspicion. She had become distant, avoiding him whenever possible and barely speaking to him during office hours. One evening, after the church had emptied and the office was quiet, Elijah confronted her. "Delilah," he said, his voice low and strained, "I need to ask you something." She froze, her back to him, as she organized papers on her desk. "What is it?" she asked, her tone guarded. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "That shot you gave me a few weeks ago. What was in it?" Delilah's hands faltered, and she set the papers down slowly. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Elijah said, his voice rising. "I've been sick, Delilah. Sarah's been sick. And I can't stop thinking about how everything started after that injection." Delilah turned to face him, her face pale but defiant. "And what are you accusing me of, Elijah? Do you really think I'd do something to hurt you?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking. "But I need the truth." For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of their breathing. Then, in a shaky voice, Delilah confessed. She told him about the betrayal she had uncovered, her conversations with Rochelle, and the plan she had carried out. As she spoke, tears streamed down her face, but her voice was firm. "I loved you, Elijah," she said, her voice breaking. "I believed you when you said I was special. But you lied to me, just like you lied to Sarah, and to everyone else who looks up to you. You deserve to pay for what you did." Elijah stared at her, his face a mask of shock and fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed my life, my family's life." "I know," Delilah whispered, "and I have to live with that." The following Sunday, Delilah stood before the congregation and confessed everything. The sanctuary was packed, the air heavy with tension, as she recounted her affair with Elijah, his infidelities, and the revenge she had exacted. Gasps and murmurs filled the room, and several people left in tears. The confession sent shockwaves through Grace Community Church. As Delilah's trembling voice carried through the sanctuary, the weight of her words seemed to press down on every soul present. People shifted uncomfortably in their pews, some with hands clasped in prayer, others shaking their heads in disbelief. "I know what I did was wrong," Delilah said, her voice cracking as she fought back tears. "But I need you all to know the truth, not just about me, but about Elijah. He isn't the man you think he is. He lied to me, to his wife, and to all of you." A gasp rippled through the congregation as she continued. "And I let my anger take over. I hurt him in a way that I can't take back. I know I'll face the consequences, but you all deserve to know what kind of man has been leading this church." In the front row, Sarah sat rigidly, her face pale, and her hands gripping the edge of the pew. Her children sat beside her, their young faces etched with confusion and betrayal. Noah stared at the floor, his jaw tight, while Grace clung to her mother's arm, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. When Delilah finished speaking, she stepped back from the podium, her knees threatening to buckle. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by muffled sobs from various corners of the sanctuary. Then Elijah stood. His usually confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a man barely holding himself together. He walked slowly to the podium, his face pale and his hands trembling. "I have failed you all," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have failed my wife, my children, and this church. There's no excuse for what I've done." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the people who had once looked up to him with such admiration. Now, those same faces were filled with anger, disappointment, and heartbreak. "Elijah, you hypocrite!" someone shouted from the back. Others joined in, their voices rising in a chaotic chorus of outrage. "How could you do this? You lied to all of us. You're supposed to be a man of God." Elijah raised a hand to calm them, though his voice was shaking. "I will step down as your pastor immediately," he said. "I don't deserve to lead this church anymore. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life seeking it." By the end of the service, the sanctuary was in chaos. Some members stormed out, vowing never to return. Others lingered in stunned silence, their heads bowed in prayer. A few approached Sarah, offering whispered condolences and apologies, though none of it could erase the pain etched on her face. The media descended on Grace Community Church within days, turning the scandal into a national headline. News outlets dissected every detail, from Elijah's infidelities to Delilah's confession and the shocking revelation of the deliberate infection. The once respected church became a symbol of hypocrisy and betrayal, its reputation irreparably tarnished. Delilah was arrested the following week, charged with aggravated assault. As she was led away in handcuffs, she kept her head high, determined to face the consequences of her actions. Elijah, now unemployed and disgraced, retreated from public life entirely. In the years that followed, the aftermath of the scandal rippled through the lives of everyone involved. Sarah filed for divorce a few months after the truth came to light. It was a painful decision, but one she knew was necessary for her own healing. Left to raise Noah and Grace on her own, she channeled her pain into advocacy work. She began volunteering with local organizations dedicated to HIV awareness and education, eventually becoming a prominent speaker. At conferences and community events, she shared her story, not to seek pity, but to empower others. "Pain doesn't define you," she told audiences. "What you do with that pain is what matters." I chose to turn mine into a purpose. Her relationship with her children grew stronger as they leaned on each other for support. Noah, inspired by his mother's resilience, pursued a degree in social work, hoping to help families navigate crises like theirs. Grace, despite her young age, found her voice through music, writing songs that reflected the strength and love she had learned from her mother. After serving years in prison, Delilah emerged a changed woman. Her time behind bars had been a period of deep reflection. She joined a prison Bible study group, where she began to grapple with the weight of her actions and the pain she had caused. Upon her release, she dedicated herself to warning others about the dangers of letting anger and revenge consume them. She began speaking at schools, churches, and community centers, sharing her story with raw honesty. "I let my pain control me," she would say. "But pain doesn't give you the right to hurt others. I've learned that the hard way." Though many still viewed her with contempt, Delilah found solace in knowing that her story might prevent someone else from making the same mistakes. Elijah, now stripped of his title and his congregation, moved to a small town far from Atlanta. He lived alone, spending his days writing letters of apology to those he had wronged. His attempts to reconnect with his children were met with resistance. Noah refused to speak to him, while Grace only sent the occasional letter, her words polite but distant. Elijah found some measure of peace in his solitude, though the weight of his guilt remained a constant companion. He often reflected on the choices that had led to his downfall, wondering if he could ever truly make amends. Grace Community Church, once a beacon of hope, faced an uncertain future in the wake of the scandal. Attendance plummeted, and the church nearly closed its doors. But a small, faithful group of congregants refused to let it die. Among them was Deacon Thomas, an elder who had served the church for decades. A quiet man with a heart for reconciliation, he stepped into the leadership void, determined to rebuild the community. "It's not about one man," he told the congregation during their first service without Elijah. It's about all of us, our faith, our commitment to each other, and our commitment to God. Under Thomas's leadership, the church slowly began to heal. They started hosting support groups for those affected by the scandal, creating a space for open dialogue and forgiveness. Sarah even returned once, not as a member, but as a guest speaker. Her presence was a powerful symbol of resilience and grace. The church also partnered with local HIV organizations, using the scandal as a catalyst for education and outreach. While the pain of the past could never be erased, Grace Community Church began to redefine itself, not as a place of perfection, but as a place of healing and redemption. The story of Grace Community Church and its fall from grace remain a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of hypocrisy, betrayal, and unchecked emotions, but also became a story of resilience, a testament to the power of faith, forgiveness, and the ability to rebuild even in the face of unimaginable pain. Though the scars remained, each character found their own path forward. Sarah became a beacon of hope, Delilah a voice of caution, and Elijah a man forever haunted by his choices. And while the community would never forget the scandal that rocked their church, they learned to move forward, one step at a time, guided by the lessons of the past. If this story resonated with you, be sure to visit our YouTube channel for more powerful true stories and lessons about betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to help spread these important messages. Join the conversation today.